My name is Robert McClellan. I'm an artist living in Los Angeles. The piece behind me is, I titled it Persephone. Persephone in Greek mythology was the daughter of Demeter, the goddess of the harvest. Now, she's important. What I'm going to do in this series of videos is describe how tyranny was viewed in the ancient Greek world, and particularly in two works. Plato's work, the Theages, which is in Thomas Pangol's book, The Roots of Political Philosophy. And across town I have Xenophon, who does a work called the Hiero. Now, how Persephone relates to this is that she was out picking flowers one day, and the earth opened up, and Hades dragged her down to the underworld to make her his queen. Now, her mother didn't appreciate this, and she was looking for her. Went to Zeus, and Zeus ordered that Hades release her. Well, he gave her a pomegranate to eat, which apparently produced this situation where she would spend some of her time in the underworld and some of her time on the surface. Now, it has been said that this somehow represents the harvest, the planting, and then the growing of the crop. I'd rather think that what it means is a releasing of the constraints within a religion, allowing her some sort of liberty. Now, an interesting aspect of this is that these are female deities. Now, early on, we see the deities being feminine and representing nature. Now, nature, in the Greek word physis, is described as something that is not produced by gods or by men. And often we see female deities that represent nature are virgins. They are not somehow associated with a god or a man. Now, when the Neolithic period began and man was harvesting crops and became a stable society, it began to grow. Now, this liberty created problems, because eventually what happens is liberty leads to self-indulgence, and then actual corruption of society. And as a result of this, there came the need of the strong man, the tyrant, who would take control, and there would be no more of this liberty nonsense. So, what I'm going to do is talk about this tyrant and how he was viewed. Now, what Plato does is he introduces theory. He tells you in his work, the Theages, he tells you the actual theory of what a tyrant is, what he desires, and what has to be done to correct his behavior. Now, Plato was an aristocrat, wealthy, well-educated, well-traveled, and he wrote for an elite few. And it's very difficult to learn how to properly read Plato so as to understand what he's really getting at. Now, across town we have Xenophon. Now, Xenophon is the exact opposite. He's a Spartan mercenary. He's a man of action. Now, but obviously very intelligent, because he was able to read Plato and understand him and implement his theories. That's the key we will get to later on. So, Briefly, in the Theages, what happens is that Theages and his father, Demodocus, encounter Socrates. And the father asks Socrates if he can help him with a problem he has. His son wishes to become wise, and he seeks a sophist to teach him. And the father is apprehensive about this and presents his problem to Socrates. Now, Socrates questions Theages what it is he really truly seeks. And then in this questioning we determine what Plato knows about tyranny and what can be done about it. It is important that Demodocus calls himself a farmer, and he's dealing with this nature. Now, when you read a Platonic dialogue, you can usually find the roots of the whole dialogue in the very beginning of that dialogue. And I will read briefly the beginning of Theages. Okay, Demodocus, he says to Socrates, I have been needing to talk to you in private about some matters, if you have leisure. And even if you don't, and your business is not very important, make some time for my sake. And Socrates answers, why, I happen to be at leisure. In any case, and indeed for your sake, very much so. If you wish to speak about something, you may. Now, leisure is important here. One thing that the Neolithic period brought was the ability to create leisure. There was an excess of food now, and that allowed certain individuals to develop. Artists, artisans, poets, philosophers. This is very important. But leisure is also a necessary element of tyranny, because the tyrant who seeks his own pleasure needs the leisure to appreciate it. So there is a positive and a negative to this idea of leisure as a result of this Neolithic growth. All right, Demodocus goes on. Then would you like to go over here out of the way into the portico of Zeus, the liberator? Now that's important. When you're reading a Platonic dialogue, you got to pay attention to who says what and where. Now we're going into the portico of Zeus, the liberator. So we're going to talk about liberation and its problems that arise from it. Okay, Socrates says, if you like, come, let's go. Now, Demodocus begins with a metaphor using planting. And he talks about his son. He says, all the things that grow very likely follow the same course, both the things that grow from the earth and the animals, man as well as others. And as regards the plants, it is very easy for us who farm the earth to make all the preparations that precede the planting and to do the planting itself. But when what has been planted takes on life, then a great difficulty and vexation tending begins. And it seems likely that the same holds concerning human beings. From my own business, I draw the inference about the rest. For as regards this son of mine here, the planting or the child begetting, whichever one ought to call it, was the easiest of all things. But the upbringing has been vexatious and has made me anxious, with constant fear concerning him. There are many other things that might be mentioned, but the desire that is now present in him is for me a great source of fear. For it's not ignoble, but it is risky, since here he is before us, Socrates, desiring, as he declares, to become wise. All right. Let's approach this idea of wisdom.